On a summer morning in 2013, in a stretch of open ground on the edge of modern Ashkelon, a trench went down through loose sand and stopped on bone. Not one body. Rows of them laid out on their backs with their arms at their sides, small juglets set by their heads, a few with an earring still in place. Over the next 3 seasons, the diggers counted more than 200 graves in that one patch of ground, and they kept it quiet while they worked because of what it was. It was a Philistine cemetery. Nobody in the history of the subject had ever found one. That sounds like a small thing until you hold it against the record. Their cities had been dug for the better part of a century. Ashdod, Ekron, Gath, Ashkelon itself. Archaeologists had their walls, their storerooms, their kitchens, their temples, and about 1 million broken pots. What nobody had was their dead. And the dead are where a people keep the things they never wrote down. How they buried, what they buried with, what they thought happened afterwards, and as it turned out, where their grandparents had been born. Everything else the world thought it knew about the Philistines came from 2 places, and neither of them was Philistine. The first is the Hebrew Bible, which mentions them hundreds of times and never once from the inside. They are the enemy in that book. They are the ones who take the ark, who hold the iron, who put a champion in the valley. It is the other side's account, and it is a very good source for what they did and a very poor one for who they were. The second is the rubbish they left behind, which does not lie but does not speak either. Here is the ground we are going to cover tonight. Where they actually came from, and the wall in Egypt that describes their arrival in the year it happened. What their kitchens and their looms and their bones say about that arrival, which is not quite what the wall says. The largest of their cities, dug for 30 years, and a piece of broken pottery out of it with 2 names scratched on the face. The best inscription any of them left, 5 clean lines of it, which names 5 kings and settles an argument that had run for 15 years. And then that cemetery, and the laboratory result that came out of it, and the way a whole people goes quiet in a single winter. Which leaves a question worth putting to you before we go any further, because you will have an answer by the end, and it may not be the one you start with. We have 2 kinds of evidence about these people. We have their enemies' scripture, which tells us what they did and hands us their names. And we have their rubbish, their flaws and their teeth, which tells us how they lived and where they came from and never records a single word they said. Which of those 2 has actually told us more about who the Philistines were? Put your answer in the comments before you hear mine, and see whether you still think the same thing at the end. Start with the list, because the list is the oldest thing we have. The text names 5 of them, and only 5: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. 4 of those sit on, or near the coastal plain, on the flat, well-watered strip that every army in the ancient world used as a road between Egypt and everywhere else. The 5th, Gath, sits inland at the edge of the foothills, looking up at the highlands where Israel lived. 5 cities, 1 people, 1 very short stretch of coast. You could drive the whole territory in an afternoon. And each city had a ruler, and the word the Hebrew text uses for that ruler is strange. It is Seron. It is used for no other people anywhere in the Bible. It is not a Semitic word. It has no Hebrew root, and the writers seem to have known it was foreign because they kept it rather than translating it. Scholars have spent a long time noticing how close it sits to the Greek word tyrannos, which in its oldest sense means simply a ruler who took power rather than inheriting it. Nobody can prove the connection. But it is the first hint in the text itself that these people came from somewhere else, and that the writers of the text knew it. The wall says where. It is in Egypt, at a mortuary temple on the West Bank at Thebes, at a place now called Medinet Habu, and it is one of the largest surviving pieces of ancient war reporting anywhere in the world. The wall belongs to Rameses III, and it was cut in the 8th year of his reign. The year is usually given as about 1177 before Christ, give or take a decade, and it sits inside the worst 50 years the Eastern Mediterranean has ever had. The inscription beside the relief says it plainly, and it is worth hearing in the words they used. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands, and no land could stand before their arms. It then names them, one after another, a list of peoples coming out of the sea, and third or fourth in that list, depending on which copy you read, is a name written in Egyptian consonants as Peliset. That is the same word the Hebrew Bible uses. That is them. The pictures are better than the text. On one wall there is a land battle, and moving through it are ox carts, solid wheeled, piled with household goods, with women and children sitting on top of the load. That is not a raiding party. Nobody brings the children on a raid. On another wall there is a sea fight in the mouth of the Nile. Egyptian archers on the bank shooting into boats whose crews wear a tall headdress of stiff feathers or reeds, and whose ships have a bird's head carved at each end. Whatever else that is, it is a population on the move. And the moment was right for it. In roughly the same half-century the palace at Ugarit burned and was never rebuilt, and one of the last things anybody wrote there was a letter reporting that enemy ships had been sighted and the city's own fleet was away. The Hittite capital at Hattusa was abandoned. The Mycenaean palaces in Greece went down one after another and took their writing system with them. Trade routes that had run for 400 years simply stopped. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse, and there is still no agreed cause, only a list of suspects. Drought, earthquake, famine, a system too tangled to survive one bad decade. Two cautions before we go on. The first is that Egyptian royal inscriptions are not neutral. Every pharaoh wins on every wall, and Rameses III is describing a great victory in a country that was itself in serious decline. The second is that the phrase Sea Peoples is not ancient at all. A French Egyptologist named Emmanuel de Rouge coined it in the 1860s, reading these same walls, and it has been doing quiet damage ever since, because it makes a single nation out of what was almost certainly a loose set of groups from several places who happened to be moving at the same time. But something did arrive, and this is where the wall stops being the only witness. Within a generation of that carving, the cities on the southern coast of Canaan stop looking like Canaanite cities. They are rebuilt bigger, they are laid out differently, and the people in them are eating, weaving, cooking, and worshipping in ways that have no local history at all. The ground says something the wall cannot say, which is what happened after the fighting stopped, when whoever these people were had to put down a floor and light a fire on it. Digging at Tel Mikni began in 1981 under an Israeli archaeologist named Trude Dothan, who had spent her whole career on this one question, and was, by then, the person who had done more than anybody living to define what a Philistine object even looked like. She ran it with Seymour Gittin, the director of the Albright Institute in Jerusalem, and the two of them stayed with the site for 16 seasons. The mound is about 20 miles inland from the sea, in the Sorek Valley, and before they started, nobody could say with certainty which ancient city it was. What they found in the earth was a sequence, and the sequence is the argument. At the bottom, a Canaanite town of a few acres, ordinary for its time and place, with the pottery and the house plans you would expect. Above it, a destruction, burning collapse, a layer you can put your hand on. And above that, without a gap, a city of about 50 acres, 10 times the size of the town it replaced, with a fortification wall, a planned layout, and a way of life that has almost nothing in common with the level directly beneath it. The pottery is the clearest single signal. In the new level, the diggers found large quantities of a ware that specialists call Mycenaean 3C, a style with a long history in the Aegean world. Fine, pale, decorated in one color, with bowls and mixing jars and cups in shapes that belong to Greece and Cyprus and the coast of Turkey rather than to Canaan. That on its own would prove only that somebody was buying imports. Imports travel, merchants travel. Pottery is the most portable thing there is. But it was not imported. The clay was analyzed, and the clay is local. Somebody was sitting in Ekron, at a wheel, with mud from the Sorek Valley on their hands, making a Greek pot from memory. You do not do that because you admire the shape. You do it because it is the shape a bowl is supposed to be, the shape your mother's bowls were, and because you were taught to make it by somebody who learned it somewhere else. Pottery styles travel with trade. Pottery habits travel with people. Then the hearths. In the middle of the main room of house after house, in the new levels at Ekron and at Ashkelon and at Ashdod, there is a built hearth. A shallow platform of clay and pebbles, rectangular or keyhole-shaped, sometimes with a layer of broken pottery packed underneath it, set into the floor. Canaanite houses did not do that. Canaanite cooking happened in ovens, usually against a wall or out in a courtyard. The hearth in the center of the room is an Aegean arrangement, and it is the most domestic thing on this whole list. It is where the family sat. Then the looms. Weaving leaves almost nothing behind except the weights that hold the warp threads down, and weights survive by the 100. Canaanite loom weights are donut-shaped, fired, with a hole drilled through for the thread. The weights that turn up in these levels are unpierced cylinders of unfired clay, spool-shaped, with no hole at all, tied rather than threaded. That is an Aegean type. And weaving, like cooking, is taught by one person to another in a room. Nobody imports a technique for hanging thread. And then the bones, which are the part that always makes people sit up. Animal bone from an excavation gets counted and sorted by species, and the proportions tell you what a city ate. In the earliest Philistine levels at Ekron and at Ashkelon, pig bones run at close to a fifth of all the animal bone that can be identified. In the highland villages of the same century, a day's walk inland, pig runs at effectively nothing. Not low, absent. Two populations living within sight of each other, one of which is eating an animal the other will not touch. There is one more object type worth a minute, because it is the only one on the list with a face. In these same levels, the diggers keep turning up a small clay figurine, seated, female, in which the chair and the body are made as one piece, so that the figure and the throne cannot be separated. It has been nicknamed the Ashdod, after the city where the first good one came out of the ground. It is a shape with a clear ancestry in Mycenaean Greece, where seated female figures of that kind had been made for centuries. Somebody carried the idea of that object across the sea and went on making it in Canaan, in local clay, long after the crossing. Put the 5 together, and the picture is not really arguable. New pots made the old way, new fires in the middle of the floor, new looms, new meat, a household god in a new shape, all arriving at once, in the same levels, in cities that had just been burned and rebuilt. This is not fashion, and it is not trade, it is people. And the last detail is the one that gets missed. By the later Iron Age, 300 or 400 years on, the pig bones at those same sites drop away again. The Aegean pottery is gone, the hearths are gone, and the people living there are writing in a Canaanite alphabet and worshipping a grain god with a Semitic name. Whoever arrived, their great-grandchildren had become locals. Which brings us to the largest of the 5 cities, and to the one everybody has already heard of without knowing they have. Gath sits inland, on a low mound above the Elah Valley, at the place now called Tel Es-Saphi. It is the city the text gives to Achish, the ruler David runs to when Saul is hunting him. It is the city the text gives to Goliath. And it is, on the ground, by a wide margin, the biggest urban site in the whole region in its own century. The site has been dug since 1996 by Aaron Meir of Bar Ilan University, in what is now one of the longest-running excavations in the country. Gath covers something like 100 acres. Jerusalem, in the same century, covers 10 or 12. That is not a difference of degree. The capital of the kingdom in the highlands would have fitted inside one district of the city. Its people were fighting, and anybody walking up from the coast saw Gath long before they ever saw the ridge above the spring. The strangest feature at Tel Es-Saphi is not in the mound at all. It is around it. Running in a great arc outside the ancient city, for something over a mile, there is a trench cut into bedrock in places, with the spoil from it heaped up on the outer side. It is not a natural feature. It was dug by hand, by a very large number of people, and it is the oldest siege work of its kind known anywhere in the world. Somebody sat down outside Gath and decided to take it properly. The excavators date that trench and the enormous destruction layer that follows it to the second half of the 9th century before Christ. And the text has a line for exactly that. In the Book of Kings, in a single verse most readers pass straight over, Hazael, king of Aram, comes down, fights against Gath and takes it. It is one sentence in scripture and half a mile of trench in the ground, and they are describing the same season. After that layer, Gath is never the same city again. The other 4 go on for another 2 centuries. Gath does not. In 2005, a small piece of broken pottery came out of a 10th or 9th century level at the site, with writing on it. 2 words in an early alphabetic script, scratched by somebody who was probably keeping a note rather than making a monument. The 2 words are personal names. Written into our letters, they come out as Old and WLT. Neither is Semitic. Both are formed the way a non-Semitic name gets pushed into that alphabet. And both of them are, in sound and in shape, the same kind of name as Goliath. Be careful with that, because it is the sort of find that gets over-reported the moment it leaves the trench. This is not Goliath's name. It is not Goliath's handwriting. The sherd is very likely a century or more later than the period the story is set in, and there is no reason to attach it to any individual at all. What it does is smaller and more useful. It says that at Gath, in that alphabet, in roughly that world, There were men walking around with names of exactly that form. The story is using a real name from a real place. The same thing happens with the armor. The description of the champion in the book of Samuel is unusually technical, and it is the only passage of its kind in the book. A bronze helmet, a coat of scale armor weighing 5,000 shekels, bronze greaves on the shins, a bronze javelin slung between the shoulders, a spear with a shaft like a weaver's beam and an iron head. The greaves in particular are the tell. Nobody in Canaan wore greaves. Greaves are Aegean. Whoever wrote that passage was describing a way of arming a man that belonged to the coast and not to the hills, and describing it accurately. And then there is the height, which is the part everybody remembers and almost nobody has checked. The oldest copies do not agree about how tall he was. The traditional Hebrew text has 6 cubits and a span, which is somewhere over 9 feet. But the oldest surviving Hebrew manuscript of Samuel, from the caves at Qumran, has 4 cubits and a span. So does the Greek translation, made in Egypt centuries before that. So does Josephus, writing in the 1st century. 4 cubits and a span is about 6 feet 9. That is not a giant out of a fairy tale. That is the tallest man in the valley, in a century when the average man stood about 5 feet 3, wearing bronze from a world nobody in the highlands had ever visited. The best single object any of these cities has produced came out of the ground at Ekron in the last season of the dig, in 1996, after 15 years of work. In the ruins of a large building in the lower city, a building with a plan that looks like a temple, the excavators found a rectangular block of limestone lying where it had fallen, in the destruction debris, on the floor it had been set into. Cut into it were 5 lines of writing, complete, unbroken, and legible. Inscriptions from this part of the world normally turn up as fragments, reused in a wall, missing the half you want. This one was whole, it was in place, and it named the man who paid for the building. Ekron, son of Paddy, ruler of Ekron, built this temple for Ptg his lady. May she bless him and protect him and lengthen his days and bless his land. 3 things fall out of that stone at once. It settles the identity of the site, because it names the city. Tel Mikni had been Ekron by inference for 15 years, and from that afternoon it was Ekron by evidence. It gives a line of 5 rulers, father to son: Ist, Ada, Yer, Paddy, and Ekron. That is a dynasty, written down by itself, in its own city, which is a thing no Philistine source had ever done for us before. And it names a goddess, Ptg, whom nobody had ever heard of, in a language that is neither Hebrew nor Greek and has been argued over ever since. If you subscribe, it genuinely helps this channel, and there is a new one every day, walking through the life of Jesus. Stay with this one though, because the 4th name on that stone is about to walk into somebody else's paperwork. And when it does, the 2 accounts line up so exactly that you can date a man's imprisonment from 2 documents written by people who never met. Paddy is not only on that stone. He is in the annals of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, in the account of the campaign of 701 before Christ. The campaign that took 46 towns of Judah and shut Hezekiah up in Jerusalem. And the annals explain, in passing, why Ekron was on the list at all. Paddy, their king, they had put in fetters and delivered him to Hezekiah the Judean. The people of Ekron had removed their own ruler for being loyal to Assyria and handed him to Jerusalem for safekeeping. Sennacherib came down, took the city, and put Paddy back on his throne. 3 separate records, 3 separate purposes, 1 man. A temple stone at Ekron, a clay prism in an Assyrian palace, and the Book of Kings telling those same years from Jerusalem's side. The 5th name does the same trick. Ikorsu, the son who set up the stone, appears in the vassal lists of 2 later Assyrian kings, Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal, summoned to bring building material to Nineveh along with the kings of Judah, Moab, Ashdod and Gaza. And Ikorsu, said aloud, is Achish. Achish is the name the book of Samuel gives to the ruler of Gath who takes David in when Saul is hunting him, 3 centuries earlier. It is not the same man. It is the same name, in the same royal families, in the same 5 cities, and it is a name the Hebrew writers could not have invented, because it does not work in Hebrew. Ekron, in its greatest years, produced olive oil on a scale that is hard to picture. In the 7th century, the excavators counted more than 100 oil pressing installations inside the city, each with its crushing basin and its stone weights, laid out in blocks along the streets, in what is by some distance the largest olive oil works known anywhere in the ancient world. The estimate for a good season is something like 1,000 tons. A city that had arrived 400 years earlier with its pots and its hearths was, by the end, an industrial supplier to an empire. That leaves the question the pottery could never settle. Pots and hearths and loom weights tell you what people did. They do not tell you who those people were, and for the best part of a century, there has been a school of thought that says none of this needs a migration at all, that a local population took up foreign fashions in a time of upheaval the way populations do, and that the Philistines were Canaanites with Aegean taste. It is not a silly argument. Objects move without people. The only way to settle it was to find the people, and the people were exactly what nobody had. The dig was run by Lawrence Stager and later by Daniel Master under the Leon Levy expedition, which had been working at Ashkelon since 1985. They had the city. They had the streets, the gate, the winery, the destruction at the end of it. What they did not have for 28 years was a grave. They looked, everybody looked. The standing joke in the field was that the Philistines were the best documented people in the region, with no visible dead. Then, in 2013, in a plot of ground outside the line of the ancient walls, the cemetery, something like 210 people had been buried there, over roughly 3 centuries, from about the 11th to the 8th before Christ. The team kept it out of the press until the excavation permit ran out 3 years later, partly to protect the site and partly because you do not announce something like that until you have finished counting it. The burials themselves are their own kind of evidence. Most are simple oval pits, the body laid on its back, full length, alone. There are small storage jars and juglets set beside the head or the feet, and perfume flasks, and in some grave a bracelet or an earring, and in a very few arrowheads. There is almost none of the practice you would expect from the Canaanite towns around them, where the dead went into rock-cut family chambers and were gathered in with their ancestors once the flesh had gone. These people buried one person at a time, in the ground, with a jar beside the head. And bone keeps more than shape. In 2019, a team led by Mikkel Feldman, working at the Max Planck Institute in Germany with the Ashkelon excavators, published the result of an attempt to pull ancient genetic material out of those skeletons. It is difficult work in that climate. Heat destroys the molecule, and most samples give nothing at all. Usable genomes came from 10 individuals in all, spread across 3 periods, a group from the Bronze Age city before any of this began, 4 infants buried under house floors in the earliest Philistine level, and a group from the cemetery itself, some centuries later. The 4 infants are the answer. Their genomes carry a component of ancestry that is simply not present in the Bronze Age samples from the same city a century or 2 before, and whose closest matches in the reference data sit in southern Europe, Crete, Sardinia, the Iberian Peninsula. Something arrived, not a fashion and not a trade route. People with children whose grandparents had lived on the other side of the sea. The wall at Medinet Habu and the pots and the hearths and the loom weights had all been pointing at that for 100 years, and here it was in a tooth. And then the second half of the result, which is the part worth carrying away from tonight. In the later samples from the cemetery, that European component has largely gone. Within about 200 years, the incoming population had married into the local one so thoroughly that the signal washes out of the bone. They stopped being genetically distinct long before they stopped being Philistines. They kept the name, the cities and the word Seren for 2 more centuries, while their ancestry quietly became the same as their neighbors. A people is not a bloodline. It is a thing you keep doing. By then, they had been in Canaan for 400 years, and they had changed in every way a people can change, except the one that mattered to the people next door. They worshipped Dagon at Ashdod, a grain god with a Semitic name and a long Mesopotamian history, which is not a god anybody carried from the Aegean. At Ekron, they had a lord of the flies, Baal-zebub, whom a king of Israel sends to consult in the Book of Kings. They wrote in a Canaanite alphabet. By the 8th century, on the evidence of their own inscriptions, they were speaking a Semitic language. The goddess on the temple stone is the last clearly foreign thing they left. There is one more record, and it is the last one. In the winter of 604 before Christ, a Babylonian army came down the coast under Nebuchadnezzar, a few years after the empire had broken Egypt's hold on the region for good. Ashkelon lay in the way, and Ashkelon had backed the wrong side. The Babylonian chronicle for that year is short, and it does not gloat, which somehow makes it worse. He marched to the city of Ashkelon and captured it. He turned the city into a mound and heaps of ruins. The excavators found that month in the ground. There is a destruction layer across the whole site, burnt buildings, collapsed roofs, a wine shop with its jars still standing in rows where somebody left them. After it, the site is empty. There is a letter, too, and it is the only thing we have written by one of them in his own hand, in the moment. It came out of the sand at Saqqara in Egypt, on papyrus, in Aramaic, from a king who signs himself Adon and who is almost certainly the ruler of one of the 5 cities. He is writing to Pharaoh. The forces of the king of Babylon have come as far as Aphek, he says, and he asks for the help the treaty promises. There is no record anywhere that the help came. After that, there are no Philistines. The cities are rebuilt in time under other administrations with other populations. The word Seren is never used again. The 5 are broken up and never reassembled. In the space of about 2 winters, a people who had held that coast for 600 years stops appearing in anybody's records, and there is no account at all of what became of the survivors, because there was nobody left with a reason to write one. The name, though, does not go anywhere. Herodotus, writing in Greek in the 5th century, calls the whole strip of coast by a version of it. Rome made a version of it the official name of the province in the 2nd century after Christ, and it has been on maps in one form or another ever since. And there is the other survival, the small one, and it is the one most people meet first. An English critic named Matthew Arnold picked the word up in 1869 from German students who had been using it for townspeople they thought were dull, and turned it into a word for a person with no feeling for art or ideas. That is what it means in English today. 5 cities, 400 years, an oil industry, a dynasty carved on a temple stone, and the name ends up as a synonym for having no taste. Which is worth sitting with at the end of a night like this. Nothing that has come out of the ground makes the account in Samuel less true. The 5 cities are where it says they are. The rulers carry the title it gives them. The names it uses are names that were really in use in those families, in that alphabet, in that place. The champion in the valley is armed the way a man from that coast would have been armed. The text is describing a real world with real accuracy, and it never claimed to be describing it fairly, because it was written by the people on the other side of the valley. What the trenches have added is not a correction. It is the other half of the room, the hearth in the middle of the floor, the jar set beside the head in the grave, and 4 infants under a house at Ashkelon whose grandparents had crossed a sea to get there.